Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that Down the Crooked Path is researched and recorded in Niagara Falls, Ontario, on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Attawandaron, and the Mississauga of Credit First. This land has been home to Indigenous peoples for thousands of years, and we recognize their enduring connection. We are grateful to share these stories on their lands that carry their histories, and we encourage our listeners to reflect on the past, present, and future of the land they call home. Welcome, wanderers, to Journey Down the Crooked Path, a place where the stories are stranger, the shadows stretch longer, and the things that go bump in the night might just be listening. I'm Amanda Joy, your guide into the eerie, the forgotten, and the downright bizarre. Here, we step off the well-lit roads of Canadian creepies and venture into the murky corners of history, folklore, and the unexplained, where the whispers grow louder and the truth is never quite what it seems. So let's take a deep breath, watch your step, and whatever you do, don't look back. Once you start down the crooked path, you never know what might follow. Canada has its fair share of mysteries, but few leave behind physical scars that linger long after the encounter. Imagine stepping into the wilderness, expecting nothing more than the quiet solitude of nature, only to return with burn marks, unexplained symptoms, and an experience so bizarre that it defies explanation. Some dismiss it as misinterpretation, an accident, or even hysteria. But others believe it was something far stranger, something beyond our understanding. One man's story would send waves through the UFO research community, becoming one of Canada's most well-documented and widely debated encounters. Unlike most sightings, this wasn't just about strange lights in the skies or unidentified craft disappearing into the clouds. This was an event where the evidence wasn't just found in reports or photographs. It was on someone's body. Today, we divulge into Canada's most puzzling and well-documented UFO encounters, the Falcon Lake incident. Unlike many sightings that rely solely on eyewitness accounts, this case left behind physical evidence, including burns, radiation exposure, and a mystery that has yet to be fully explained. Was it a military experiment, a hoax, or something truly otherworldly? As we uncover the details, we'll explore what happened that fateful day in 1967 and why it remains one of Canada's most chilling unsolved events. Stefan Michalak was born in Poland, where he lived throughout the turbulence of World War II. Like many others, he had faced the uncertainties of post-World Europe, navigating a landscape reshaped by conflict. Seeking new beginnings, he immigrated to Canada in 1949, settling in Winnipeg, Manitoba with his wife and children. Once in Canada, Michalak began to build a life as an industrial mechanic, working hard at Inland Cement Company, and he was also an amateur geologist. He had a passion for prospecting, often venturing into the wilderness to search for quartz or silver deposits. His work required technical skill and patience, as he spent many long hours examining rock formations and staking out claims in remote areas. Stefan had previously explored Falcon Lake region, a rugged landscape known for its Canadian shield formations, and had staked some claims. This shield is one of the oldest geological formations on Earth, dating back over 4 billion years. It covers the vast portion of Canada, stretching from the Great Lakes to the Arctic Ocean, and is composed of ancient igneous and metamorphic rock. This rugged terrain shaped glacial features, thin soil layers, and exposed bedrock, and countless lakes and rivers. Rich in minerals like nickel, gold, silver, and copper, the shield has played a crucial role in Canadians' mining industry. Its harsh landscape and remote wilderness makes it a challenging yet fascinating region to explore for geologists and prospectors alike. On May 20th, 1967, the morning air was crisp, and Stefan made his way through the rugged landscape near Falcon Lake. With a prospector's keen eye, he scanned the terrain, searching for promising quartz formations and traces of silver embedded within the rock. His backpack carried the essentials: a hammer, chisel, and a notepad for sketching his finds. The solitude of the wilderness was a familiar comfort, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves or the distant call of bird. However, on this particular day, the natural symphony was abruptly interrupted by a commotion above. A gaggle of geese, startled and frantic, took to the sky in a flurry of wings and alarmed cries. Their eccentric flight caused Stefan's attention, and as he lifted his gaze, his breath hitched. Against the backdrop of the clear Manitoba sky, two cigar-shaped crafts hovered, both emanating a reddish glow that pulsed softly, like embers floating in the sky. Their presence was surreal, their movements eerily controlled. One of the crafts lingered above, its glow flickering as though through an intelligent command, while the other descended with unwavering precision. The landed craft touched down gracefully on the rocky clearing ahead. Its metallic surface shimmered under the midday sun. The second craft hovered in the air for several moments and then suddenly adjusted its angle and sped off into the horizon, vanishing as swiftly as it had appeared. Instinctively, Stefan reached for his notepad, his heart pounding with a mixture of curiosity and anticipation. Whatever this was, it was unlike anything he had ever encountered during his solitary excursions in search of minerals. As Stefan steadied himself, his mind raced with the thoughts of possibilities. Was this some kind of an experimental military vehicle? Had he stumbled upon a classified operation deep in the wilderness? The craft sat motionless, its metallic surface pulsing with the same reddish glow he had seen in the sky. Approaching cautiously, he called out, "Hello? Do you need help?" His words drifted into the open air, unanswered. He tried again, cycling through Polish, English, even some German, in case whoever or whatever was inside might respond. But the craft remained silent, unmoved by his presence. Determined to document what he was seeing, Stefan pulled out his notepad and spent the next hour and a half meticulously sketching the craft, capturing its smooth contours and the lack of visible seams, the strange panel-like sections along its surface. The pulsing red glow seemed to emanate from specific areas, giving the impression of a controlled energy rather than an ordinary reflection of light. As he worked, he noticed an opening, very faint, along its sides, dark slits that hinted at some kind of entry mechanism. The air around the craft carried this distinct metallic scent, something arsenic and sterile, unlike the earthy tones of the wilderness. As Stefan circled the craft, his curiosity outweighed his caution. He reached out hesitantly, his gloved hand contacting the smooth metallic surface. The material was scorching hot, far beyond what he was expecting. The moment his fingertips grazed it, a sharp burning sensation shot through the fabric, forcing him to recoil. He examined the gloves, and their protective layers had been singed, parts of the material now scorched and disintegrated from the intense heat. His mind raced. What kind of vehicle radiated such extreme temperatures simply by resting on the ground? He had touched plenty of metals before in his prospecting, but nothing this volatile. Then, as if the craft detected his interference, a sudden burst of hot gas erupted from its side, slamming into his chest and stomach. The searing heat knocked the breath out of him, sending him stumbling backwards. His shirt bore a grid-like imprint from the vented opening, his skin beneath rapidly blistering. Pain surged through his torso, nausea crept in, and dizziness clouded his vision. Every breath was labored. The air around him was thick with that metallic scent. His limbs felt heavy. His thoughts muddled over by the sickness taking hold. Stefan had ventured into the wilderness in search of minerals, but whatever he had found here was something else entirely. Dazed and in agony, Stefan knew that he had to get out of the forest. Each step, though, was a battle. His nausea was relentless, his balance unsteadied. The burns on his chest and stomach throbbed with unbearable heat, and his mind struggled to focus. He forced himself forward, navigating through the rugged terrain, his breath shallow as he fought against the rise of sickness. After what felt like an eternity, he finally reached the edge of the forest and stumbled onto the highway. Relief flickered through him as he spotted a patrol officer in the distance. Summoning the last of his strength, he waved the officer down, his voice strained as he explained what happened. Though skeptical, the officer could see that Stefan was in distress, and he helped him arrange transport back to his hotel in Falcon Lake. Once inside the familiar walls of his hotel room, Stefan collapsed on the bed, his body exhausted, his thoughts a blur. But it soon became clear that in his condition, he needed help. He was getting worse. His skin had erupted in strange burns. His nausea was unbearable, and the dizziness refused to subside. Desperate for medical attention, he realized there were no doctors nearby. His only option was to board a bus to Winnipeg, where the nearest hospital could provide the care he needed. And every mile felt like an eternity, his body betraying him with uncontrollable nausea and weakness. Whatever had happened to him back at the craft, whatever force had burned him, was no ordinary injury. As the bus carried him forward towards the city, he could only hope that someone, somewhere, could help him make sense of what had just transpired. Once Stefan arrived at the hospital in Winnipeg, the doctors immediately noticed the severe thermal burns all across his chest and abdomen. His skin bore deep, red burns, many of them blistering, and yet the most perplexing texture was a distinct grid-like pattern imprinted on his torso, an unnatural mark that puzzled the medical staff. It didn't resemble burns from conventional sources like fire or heated metal, nor to match common radiation exposure. Despite their confusion, doctors proceeded with standard burn treatment. They cleaned the affected area, they carefully removed the damaged skin to prevent infection, cooling compresses were applied to alleviate the heat, still radiating from his injuries. And his wounds were treated with topical ointments designed for thermal burns. Concerned about deep tissue damage, they monitorized his symptoms closely, noting that his persistent nausea, dizziness, and weakness, these were effects that seemed far more severe than a typical burn injury.
Once upon a time, in the land of everyday moments, there lived a sprinkle of magic called icing sugar photography. From sticky cake smash smiles to windswept yes moments, they capture the sugar sweet, the beautifully messy, and everything in between. Whether you're a blushing bride or a blooming family, or just want to freeze time for a second, icing sugar photography is your fairy god lens. Visit icingsugarphotography.com and follow along on Instagram at icingsugarphoto. Let your story sparkle, because life is sweet and memories should be too.
To manage his growing discomfort, they administered painkillers and kept him under observation for signs of systemic shock and radiation sickness. Despite their best efforts, the strange grid-shaped pattern burns, they stubbornly remained unexplained, defying conventional medical understanding. Even after returning home, Stefan was far from recovering. The same odor from the craft clung to him relentlessly. No matter how many times he showered, scrubbed his skin, or changed his clothes, the smell refused to fade. It was as though it had seeped into his very pores, a lingering reminder of the bizarre encounter. His burns remained raw and painful, the grid-like pattern stubbornly etched into his torso. Some areas blistered further, while others took on this unsettling deep red hue that didn't appear to heal as expected. The discomfort was constant. Making simple movements were agonizing. The doctors had treated them as thermal burns, but this was something that was different. It was unlike anything he had suffered before. And then came the headaches, sharp and unrelenting. Pain radiated from behind his eyes, clouding his thoughts, leaving him fatigued and drained. The nausea persisted, along with strange weakness that made every basic task overwhelming. At times, dizziness overtook him, forcing him to sit down abruptly, fearful that he might collapse. In the days and weeks that followed the incident, Stefan's health worsened rather than improved. His appetite diminished and his energy levels plummeted. Despite ruling out radiation, Stefan's symptoms continued to ebb and flow unpredictably. At times, he would start to feel better, his appetite would return, his burns gradually fading, and then, without warning, everything would resurge. The nausea would grip him again, the headaches would start to return with intensity, and his skin would flare up, reactivating the grid-like burn pattern as though it had never fully healed. Doctors and investigators were baffled. Like, what could cause his symptoms to vanish, only to come back weeks or months later? Even if the physical burns eventually faded, the strange reoccurrences and nausea and weaknesses persisted for years, coming and going without any clear explanation. As Stefan struggled to process what happened to him, word of his bizarre encounter began to spread beyond his immediate circle. And it wasn't long before the press caught wind of the Falcon Lake incident, and soon, his story became a news headline. Initially, Stefan was hesitant to share too much. He was a prospector, not a public figure, and the sudden flood of attention made him uneasy. But as speculation grew, fueled by the mystery of his injuries and the grid-like burns that baffled doctors, journalists, UFO enthusiasts, and skeptics clamored for details, some questioning his credibility, while others raced to investigate, eager to determine whether Falcon Lake was truly one of Canada's most compelling UFO encounters. Despite his reluctance, Stefan eventually spoke to the media, providing the sketches and recounting his experience with measured detail. But the scrutiny was relentless. His life was no longer private, and the burden of proving what had happened weighed heavily on him. From newspaper articles to television segments, his story spread internationally, cementing Falcon Lake's place in UFO history. While some dismiss it as fabrication, others point to the physical evidence, the burns, as proof that something extraordinary had taken place. Among the first to take his accounts serious was Grant Hart, a researcher who approached Stefan with genuine curiosity. Unlike the journalists who sought sensationalized headlines, Hart listened carefully, eager to understand what had happened in the Manitoba wilderness. He examined the evidence, he studied Stefan's medical records, and he worked to document the encounter in detail. His involvement helped shape early investigations, ensuring that Stefan's account was taken seriously. Then, curiously, Hart vanished. He had been one of Stefan's strongest supporters, yet after publicizing his research, he withdrew from the investigation entirely. No further inquiries, no follow-ups. Just gone. And Stefan was left to face the growing skepticism alone, his credibility constantly under fire. Years later, another voice emerged. Chris Rakowski, a Canadian UFO researcher who had spent his life studying unexplained aerial phenomenon. Unlike many before him, Rakowski approached Stefan's story with both curiosity and scientific rigor. He pored over the medical records, witness statements, and government reports, determined to preserve the truth of the Falcon Lake incident. Stefan Michalak, Stefan's son, who had lived through the chaos firsthand. As a child, he has seen his father return home sick and burned, had smelt the sulfuric stench that lingered on his skin, and watched the world pick apart his father's experience. Decades later, Stan made it his mission to preserve the story, working with Rakowski to document every detail in their book, When They Appeared. He provided personal insights, recounted his father's struggle with recurring systems, and how skeptics challenged his credibility. Despite the skepticism that surrounded his account, Stefan remained determined to prove that something extraordinary had happened at Falcon Lake. investigators searched for the landing site. They combed through the dense wilderness, but none had been able to locate it. The terrain was unforgiving, rocky outcrops, thick forest, and winding trails made navigation difficult. Some had begun to doubt whether Stefan would truly be able to retrace his steps. But Stefan knew the land well, and he had spent years prospecting the area, mapping out its features in his mind. So weeks after the initial search had failed, he set out again. This time with George Adamke, a fellow investigator who had taken an interest in the case. Unlike others who had dismissed his claims, George believed that there was something worth finding. He had studied the details of the encounter and listened to Stefan's description and was eager to uncover any physical evidence that might validate the story. Together they returned to the wilderness, following the path that Stefan had taken that fateful day. Then, he found it. The site was unmistakable. Scorched rock face, a circular patch where the moss had been stripped away, the remnants of burnt debris. George stood beside Stefan, surveying the scene and realizing that this was the proof they had been searching for. Stefan had led them straight to the location. His ability to pinpoint the exact spot added credibility to his account. Once the site was identified, authorities conducted radiation tests, hoping to uncover more clues. The results were puzzling. While surrounding areas showed normal radiation levels, the rock face at the center of the landing site contained elevated traces of radium-226. This isotope is naturally occurring, but it is also found in nuclear reactor waste and industrial applications. Investigators noted that the radiation was concentrated in specific areas rather than being evenly spread out throughout the site. Some speculated that the craft itself had formed a shield, which could explain why Stefan didn't suffer from acute radiation poisoning despite his proximity to the object. If the craft had contained a radioactive energy source, prevented direct exposure, except the moment when the blast of hot gas struck Stefan, possibly carrying residual radiation. Others theorized that the radium-226 found at the site could have been naturally occurring, as the region sits on the Canadian Shield, one of the oldest and most mineral-rich geological formations on Earth. This vast expanse of rock contains naturally occurring radioactive elements, such as uranium and thorium, which decay over time. They produce radium-226. In certain locations, these elements can concentrate in specific deposits, leading to elevated radiation levels. However, what puzzled investigators was the localized nature of the radiation at the landing site. While the surrounding area showed normal readings, the rock face where the craft allegedly landed contained significantly higher levels. Despite these theories, no definitive explanation was ever reached, and the radiation findings remain an anomaly. As the Falcon Lake incident gained attention, multiple agencies launched investigations hoping to uncover the truth behind Stefan's encounter. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, or RCMP, the Canadian Department of Natural Defence, and the United States Air Force all conducted their own inquiries. The RCMP initially approached the case with cautious skepticism. Their primary concerns centered Stefan's injuries and the radiation levels detected at the site, and whether or not there was any sort of criminal or national security threat linked to the incident. Medical assessments confirmed Stefan had suffered burns, but the exact cause remained elusive. When radiation tests were conducted, investigators noted irregular readings. However, the RCMP concluded that these could stem from naturally occurring minerals in the region due to the area's geological composition. Ultimately, the agency closed its inquiry without declaring the event a UFO encounter, leaving the case unresolved but documented. The Department of National Defense, or DND, became involved after reports surfaced that radiation had been detected at the landing site. Concerned about potential national security implications, they conducted their own assessment. However, their findings aligned somewhat with those of the RCMP. While radiation was present, it was not high enough to pose an active threat or suggest the presence of an unknown craft. One of the most peculiar responses came when Minister of Parliament Edward Scheer raised questions about the government's UFO investigation at the House of Commons, specifically citing the Falcon Lake case. The government's reply was vague and dismissive, avoiding direct answers about what had been found. This fueled speculation among UFO research that the information was being withheld, though no classified documents have ever surfaced to confirm this. With Falcon Lake lying so close to the US-Canada border, the United States Air Force also took an interest in the case. This time, the USAF was operating Project Blue Book, a classified program analyzing UFO sightings across North America. Their findings were mostly skeptical. While they acknowledged Stefan's injuries and the radiation readings, they did not classify the event as a confirmed UFO case. Instead, their assessment suggested that the burns could have been caused by hot gases from natural or an industrial source. Some investigators within Blue Book eventually entertained the idea that possibly Stefan had simply encountered an ordinary aircraft, although no records point to any known craft matching his description. With no agency providing a definitive answer, theories began to take shape, some grounded in science and others veering into speculation. One of the most scientific explanations posed that the radium-226 found at the site was naturally occurring. However, skeptics argue that the concentrated levels of radiation at the landing site could indicate that something had interacted with the environment, altering its properties. Then came the speculative theories. Some believed that Stefan had stumbled upon a secret military aircraft, perhaps an experimental vehicle, either Canadian or American in origin. This theory hinged on the idea that he hadn't encountered something extraterrestrial, but instead was exposed to classified technology. However, no known military records support such a presence. Initially, the most controversial theory leans into the extraterrestrial hypothesis. Supporters point to Stefan's injuries, the grid-like burns, the lingering sickness, and the radiation readings, as evidence that he had come into contact with some unknown technology, one not engineered by human hands. Despite the scrutiny, the testing, the investigations conducted by 3 different agencies, none were able to offer a conclusive explanation. The radiation levels, the physical injuries, and the site's strange markings remain unexplained. But for some believers, the Falcon Lake case stands as one of the best documented encounters with an unknown phenomenon. The grid-like burns, the lingering sickness, and the concentrated radiation levels resist conventional explanations. The metallic craft, the blast of searing air, the sulfuric stench, each detail offers a tantalizing glimpse into the possibility that something beyond human understanding occurred that day. For Stefan, however, the theories mattered far less than the reality he lived. The encounter followed him for years, shaping his way of life in a way he could have never anticipated. Though he never sought fame, he became a reluctant figure in the UFO investigation world, questioned, scrutinized, and at times ridiculed for his claims. Yet despite the skepticism, he never wavered. He maintained that he had seen something, that he had been burned, and that he had suffered lasting effects. But he could never claim to know exactly what it was. Stefan himself was inclined to believe that the craft was some sort of experiment, a man-made vehicle, possibly military in origins, rather than something extraterrestrial. But he was never 100% certain. Outside of the public eye, Stefan continued his work as an industrial mechanic, supporting his family and trying to live as normally as possible. He remained deeply connected to nature, often retreating into the wilderness, the very place where his life had been altered forever. He was a man of quiet resilience, someone who had endured both physical and emotional scars from his experience. Stefan passed away on October 28, 1999, at the age of 38 in Winnipeg, Manitoba. His legacy, however, did not fade. His son Stan took it upon himself to preserve his father's story, ensuring that the Falcon Lake incident remains one of Canada's most well-documented UFO cases. Even decades after his death, Stefan's experience has continued to spark debates, intrigue, and speculation. Was it a misidentified aircraft, a natural phenomenon, or something otherworldly? Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain. Stefan Michalak's story continues, and the mystery refuses to be forgotten.
That was an eerie journey down the crooked path with Amanda. How cool was that? If you loved it, don't forget to follow Down the Crooked Path on Instagram and TikTok. Amanda shares some really fun interactive content over there, and trust me, it gets even creepier. Down the Crooked Path is our sister podcast, and you can catch new episodes every Thursday wherever you get your podcasts. So if you're into the paranormal, folklore, and strange little corners of the world, we've got you covered.